challenge in terms of attracting the right talent, and executives are down to software developers and everything in between. It's a challenge. And if you run your own companies or you're part of companies, you'll realize that I'm not making this stuff up. Part of what I thought would make sense, I'm going to introduce James Lauber here in a second. He's a consultant here in town, and he's dedicated the last 10 years of his career to helping teach people how to better communicate and drive better results out of their teams. And all of that plays into what I was just suggesting, right? If you create a healthy, engaging, growing workforce, you're going to do better than the guys who don't. So I'm going to stop at that, and I'm going to ask James to maybe take it from there and tell us what you've been doing.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to take advantage of the lapel mics so that I can wave my hands around. Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? Better results come from better teams. Better teams are made from people, and in order for people to work well together, we need better communication. But what do we mean by better communication? Better communication is better handling of disruptors that come up so that we work well together so that we get to the better results. My background prior to doing this, for up until about 2015, for about 30 years before that, I was in software. I was in IT. I did project management. I started off in programming, went through analysis, got to project management, spent most of my career in project management, where I realized and discovered that although we have great resources in terms of personnel, team members, great tools to work with, really well-defined plans, we still had issues with the results. The results being either we're meeting on target on time, or we're meeting on target on budget, or we're meeting on target on quality. So my two fascinations are how to get the better results, and the second one is what is the root cause of why we're not getting the better results. So those are the two things that have always fascinated me. Even as a little kid, I've been fascinated with this kind of stuff. Getting now down to root cause analysis, which sounds dry, but it's fun, I promise. The root cause is the question, why are we getting these results? What is contributing to these results? Another why do we care about these results? What is getting in the way of team performance is what I'd like to call disruptors. Disruptors cause distractions. When you're disrupted and you're distracted and the environment is disrupted and distracted, clearly there's going to be an impact on performance, and that's where the issue lies. The results are the result of performance, correct? So the why and the what leads to how, and this is the root cause analysis part. How are we going to overcome those issues? How are we going to get better at managing these disruptors, and what kind of an effect do they have, and how much control do we have over what kind of effect that they have on us? Disruptions, I like to put into three distinct categories. There's a lot of disruptions, there's a lot of sources of disruptions. I put them into three distinct categories. The first one is change. Many people, not all, but many people find change itself to be disruptive. Would you agree? What comes out of change? Change leads to anxiety. Change leads to we're not sure where we're going. We're not sure if we're secure. We're not sure what the future holds. And that is disruptive. And it's disruptive because it's distracting. You're trying to get your job done, but you're thinking, what effect is this going to have on my future? And it's difficult, more difficult to concentrate on the task at hand. So change is a major disruptor. Not everybody is affected by change that way. Many people embrace change. Change is interesting, it's exciting, what's coming new, they're early adopters, they get excited about change. And even for those people, there's a disruptive effect because they're busy trying to figure out the new shiny tool, and that's a distraction from what they're otherwise doing. And their response to change, being an embracing response to change, might be disruptive to other members of the team who don't have an embracing response to change. So disruptions from change is a big issue. Another one is incivility, the opposite of civility. No laughs. Incivility is very rarely experienced in the workplace as right in your face incivility. Most of the time it's very covert because nobody or very few people are willing to stand up and be recognized and identified as being a source of the problem or being involved in the problem. So if there's an issue between two coworkers, you're not going to see these two coworkers going head to head, face to face. You're going to see these two coworkers going, yes, I like your idea, that's an excellent idea. And then you're going to see these two coworkers separate and go and do it their own way anyway. So that is an expression of incivility. Another expression of incivility is we have a procedure, we have a process, we have some other factor other than an interpersonal factor. There's a procedure or a process, let's call it. And this is the way we do things, and the person is not in agreement with the way we do things, but they don't say anything. They just say, yes, yes, we'll do it that way, and then they go off and do it in their own way. So that's an incivility, and it's a disruptor. It's a disruptor on the individuals and a distractor, and it's a disruptor and a distractor on the whole team. Does that make sense? Thank you. The other is stress. We all know stress. We all live in a stressful lives. We all have stress factors that are work-related. We all have stress factors that are personal life-related. And all of that stress comes together as a disruptor and a distractor as well. So that's in the beginning of the root cause of what is the problem, the three big disruptor factors that are involved. Next is, why are disruptors distracting in the first place? It's our perceptions, and this is where power starts to come into play. What we perceive to be a disruptor is what makes it a disruptor, almost entirely. And our perceptions are a result of our history with the interaction with the team that we have at work. This is one set of disruptions, and this is one set of disruptions that are setting a standard, setting a pattern, setting a tone. We have that same thing going on with our personal lives. We have friends, we have families. This is the perception that I bring to how I'm going to respond to this disruptor. And then there's the internal dialogue disruptor. That perception that you carry with you is that voice, that is that monologue in your head. When you come into contact with something that you find curious, you're going to have a pattern in your head. You're going to have a dialogue in your head about how you feel about that. That dialogue is not only what you're saying to yourself, that dialogue is a large amount to do with how you feel about it, and how you feel about it is a life experience. So when we're working together in teams, how we perceive disruptions that occur is an individual experience, and that makes it even more complex. So far, so good? So now we're getting to the root cause. I'm going through all of this to say, what is the root cause of performance impact? It's disruptors and how we perceive disruptors. That's the personal experience. Now I'm going to take a hard left turn and talk a little bit about why we care. As individuals, we care because when we're not performing at our best, it's going to impact our potential. When our teams are not performing at their best, from a company perspective, it's going to impact our ability to perform. It's going to impact our results. What those impacts are costs. This is a Harvard Business Review study where I got this information from. It was a big surprise to me to find out that 50% of our employees, and this is thousands of employees across 17 different industries, 50% of our employees are operating at something less than 100% of their compensation due to disruptions and distractions that we've been talking about. It's not malicious, that's the reality. 40% roughly are operating at roughly 80% of their compensation, and 10% are operating at roughly 60% of their compensation. And of course, there's the regular achievers and the overachievers that offset this. The net result of this is that the findings are 10% of our salary costs, our compensation costs, are being lost annually as a result of disruptions. And disruptions are people problems, and people problems are the people problems that affect teams and affect performance. So the performance cost is 10% of our annual cost of employees. That's a huge number, and that's a good reason why we should be caring about this. There's another huge number. Disruption leads to turnover. Turnover is very expensive. If we look at it just quickly on the surface with the hard costs of turnover, it's already very expensive. But what is the soft costs of turnover? When you have a turnover event of an employee, it costs up to 40% of that employee's annual salary for that turnover event to transpire. Why? There's the hard costs we all know about, and there's the soft costs or the disruption costs. When that employee leaves, whether it's by their own choice or whether they're encouraged to leave, there's a gap that is created and people have to backfill. That's part of those soft costs. When a new employee eventually comes on board, it takes a certain amount of time for them to come up to speed, and that is part of those costs. They also have a disruptive impact on everybody else in that team that they're joining, because everybody else in that team that they're joining doesn't know if they're going to be able to work well with this person, if they're going to get along well with this person. Perhaps this person is going to be a threat to their ability to advance in their career because they have skills that are better than them. That is a disruption, that is a distraction, that impacts performance. So when you add up all of those soft costs, that's how you get to up to 40% of the annual salary of an employee is the cost of a turnover event. Turnover events are more likely when we're having a disrupted environment in the first place. Agreed? The higher up the scale you go on the management chain, the bigger those soft costs are. I mean, the bigger the hard costs are as well, but it has a greater impact because there's a much wider audience that's affected by that change. At the team level, you maybe have less than 10 people that are affected by that disruptive event of the turnover. At the executive level, you could have as much as everybody in the company disrupted by that. And it's not because they should be disrupted. It's not because there's a real reason. It could be just a rumor. Perhaps the rumor is this executive is coming on board because there's some kind of a problem and their mandate is to cut costs, and perhaps that could be layoffs, and that could affect everybody in the company. So when I looked at this number, I said 200% of an executive salary is the turnover cost. How can that possibly be? And that is how it can possibly be. It's the disruptive effect on virtually everybody in the company who thinks that that turnover event might have some effect on them, might have some negative effect on them. Does that make sense? Big number to get your head around. So now we've followed two little paths. One is the what path. What is the cause of reduced performance? And the other is the why path. Why do we care? So to summarize, the what cost is the disruption event which is causing people to be distracted, causing people to be agitated, causing people to be stressed, and as a result of all of that, they're having difficulty working together. That's the what. That's the root cause of what. It's disruptions and people's reactions to disruptions. We good? On the other side of that is why do we care? As individuals, we should care because when we're disrupted and it's impacting our performance, then that could have an impact on our future, right? Because we're not performing at our best. We're interrupted from performing at our best. For sure that's going to have an impact on our future. The good news is we're going to get a little bit later into how we can manage all of these things because they're much more manageable than they seem at first. From the company's perspective, of course, there's tremendous cost. And there's opportunity cost, which we haven't talked about at all, and we're not really going to talk much about, But the reality is, if you have a disrupted workforce who's not performing at their best, they're not coming up with the best out-of-the-box solutions to the business problems that undoubtedly are occurring on a regular basis. And that is a lost opportunity, which can be a competitive in the marketplace opportunity. And that has an enormous cost, which if you look at it and study it carefully enough, you can estimate, but we can't estimate from this perspective. Good? So now we're at the foundation. We're at the root cause. We're down to understanding what the problems are. Now, how do we start to build up from that problem? We have to focus on the reality that this is a people problem and the reality that we have to understand how we can help people learn to deal better with the disruptions which are causing them to have underperformance issues. We good? So now it's the start of the good news. Have I got everybody like nice and melancholy now? It goes up from here, gets fun. The first thing is another one of these things that surprised me as I discovered this body of knowledge. In a team of 4 people, and I want to do a little poll here, so I'm going to ask you to vote. In a team of 4 people, do you think there's less than 10 interpersonal interactions or interaction sets existing in a team of 4? So if you think there's less than 10 interaction sets, could you give me a nod or a vote? Okay. What if there's more than 10? A lot more people are voting. So I'll go through it really quickly. Each individual has their own perception, which is what they're projecting as their internal dialogue onto the team. That's 4. Each group of 2 is another 6. That's 10. Each group of 3 is another 4. That's 14. And the entity itself, the group of 4, is a 15th. So with a team which is small, a team of 4, you have 15 different interpersonal relationships which are interacting with each other and responding from their perspective to whether they find a disruptive event distracting for them or not, and how does that bounce off of everybody else. So it's a complex scenario, right? What do you think happens when you add one more person to this complex scenario? I'll tell you what happens. It doubles. It's actually double plus 1. It goes to 31 because it's an exponent thing. A team of 5 isn't even a huge team. Let's say there's a team of 8, because that's a reasonable sized team. You want to guess what the number is? No, here it is. It's 255. So in a small team of 8 people, there's 255 different perspectives that are in play at any one time. And they're responding from their perspective to different distractions. And there's a history that's involved because these people have been working together for some time. And they bring their own internal dialogue to it as well. So that's a complex environment that we're trying to address. Does that sound a little overwhelming? Well, here's the good news. It's actually not overwhelming. There's some really simple little principles and simple little tools that can be applied that solve this problem almost entirely. And we'll start with that now. What is the first thing? This is something that we don't all pay attention to all the time, I'm quite sure. But this is our endorphin system, which is releasing chemicals into our brains and into our bloodstreams as a result of what we perceive this disruption event to mean to us. How does that play out in real life? Let me give you an example that will make it make sense a little bit more. Let's say it's a beautiful afternoon, you're walking back from lunch, you're downtown, and you're just having a lovely time. All of a sudden you hear screeching tires and crunch right beside you. Just me saying that already gives you a little tingle, doesn't it? Don't you have a little bit of a reaction? If you're actually on the sidewalk, you're going to have a big reaction because you're right there and it's live, and you're going to jump and you're going to look, and then you're going to see that there's nothing flying at you. So because there's nothing flying at you, there's no immediate danger, that starts to subside right away. Of course, you're going to want to look at the accident anyway, because who can resist, right? But the chemical response reaction, the nature reaction is going to start subsiding right away. You see that? Now, what's the difference in a work environment? It's essentially the same response because the brain doesn't care what the risk is. The brain responds to risk. So if the perceived risk of having some kind of an event take place that you think might have some kind of an impact on you and your personal security and your future hits, the brain's going to perceive it as a risk. Because it perceives it as a risk, depending on how great the risk seems to be from your perspective, it's going to release a little bit of this cortisol event. The difference between what happens when it's an instant event, like what it was designed for, like, is there danger? No, there's danger, we're okay. And what happens in an environment where you're constantly stimulated with that perceived risk is that you get a smaller dose, but you get it constantly. And the net cumulative effect of that overstimulation is that you can end up being anxious, you can end up being depressed, you can end up being distracted, you can get to burnout, and that is a major contributing factor to this burnout phenomenon that we're living with now. We live in very stressful times. Agreed? Here's the kicker. Just being aware that that's what's really going on, already just the awareness gives us a certain amount of control over how much impact we allow it to have on us. Does that make sense? Even better, you can choose to purposefully take a lot more control over that by asking yourself a simple question. That simple question can be, well, the one that I like to use, don't have to use this particular one, but it's a logical question. Put yourself into a rational state of mind by saying, is this serving me at this moment? That's what I say to myself. So if I'm triggered and I recognize that I'm triggered and I'm aware of it, so now I know that I'm triggered and I know it's just a chemical release, which is a natural event because that's the way we were designed, I identify that and I say, oh, I'm triggered. Is this serving me at this time? If the answer is yes, because you're in an alleyway and it's late at night and someone suspicious is in the alleyway, it might serve you. You might want to run. It might be good for you to embrace that release. But if you're in a workspace and you're not even sure if there really is a threat, you just perceive that there might be a threat and that's what's triggering you, it's not serving you at this time. Now, is it? So if you put yourself into a rational state by saying, is this serving me at this time? It's almost a binary system. It's not quite, but it's almost a binary system. If you put yourself in a rational state, you can't maintain an irrational state in the same moment. Vice versa, if you're stimulated and this cortisol is flowing and you're in an irrational state, you can't maintain a rational state of mind either. It goes one way or the other at any one moment in time. Now, it can bounce back and forth so fast that it doesn't feel like it's at any one moment in time, but in fact, that's the way it is. It's very close to binary. There's one other little tidbit to this, which I find very exciting. You now know how to do this for yourself. You can do this for others, whether they're aware that you're doing this to them or doing this for them or not. And the way you do that is you induce them to be in a rational state. So quick little scenario, you're having some kind of a confrontation, there's some kind of a disagreement with a coworker over some aspect of the project, and it's starting to get a little heated. Has this ever happened? Once or twice maybe? You put yourself into a rational state, is this serving me? Is allowing this to escalate and participating in this escalating serving me right now? I would say the answer is probably no. You're now in a rational state. You start taking interest in the other person's perspective by asking them fact-finding questions, open-ended questions, which cause them to be in a rational state. Like, that's really interesting. What do you mean by that? I'm not sure I agree, but I'd like to know why you mean that so that I can evaluate and maybe we do agree. I don't know yet. So you're asking these kind of questions. The effect that that has on their brain is it puts them into a rational state. So now, this event, which could easily escalate and be one of many escalations which accumulate over time, this one has purposefully been de-escalated by you putting yourself into a rational state and invoking that other person into a rational state. How powerful is that? That's really cool stuff. So when I said it's a very complex environment, But there's there's relatively simple little tools that you can learn and apply which de-escalates that complex environment and manages that complex environment. This is one example that I'm talking about. Is that cool stuff? If that's the only thing that you retain out of this evening, that's going to serve you well, I'm sure. But there is another one. I like peeling back the layers of the onion. It's fun, makes you cry. There's another one, and it's an important one as well. It's context. Now, we live in a world where things are going screaming by at a huge, fast pace all the time. And we have a tendency, because we have the ability, to communicate with each other by text. We could have an email. We could have a text on our machine. We could have Snapchat. There's any number of ways that we can communicate each other with text, communicate with each other by text, correct? And is it sometimes tempting, if there's some kind of controversy rising, or you think there's some kind of a risk that this interaction might lead to an escalation, to use text instead? Because now you're in your safe zone, because they're not even in front of you. You can say whatever you want in the text. Boom, my responsibility is done. I've spoken my mind. Has that ever been a temptation? Ever? Anyone? Have to admit it's been a temptation for me as well. But here's the risk. The risk is when you put something in text, you don't transmit very much context. You might transmit a little because you might put a happy face on it or something in a bracket, or you might have some context transmitted because it's a transaction that's going back and forth. They say this in text, you say that in text, you're responding. There might be some context, but there's nowhere near the amount of context as comes with a face-to-face transaction. And why is that? Because we're humans. And we read things out of body language, and we read things out of the look in the eye, and we read things and we sense things out of, is this the normal response from this person, or is this an unusual response from this person? So some of it is the words that are spoken, and some of it is the non-verbal communication that is expressed, and some of it is just sensory stuff that we don't really even pay very much attention to, but it registers. Cool stuff? So we're talking about context. Let me give you an example that will kind of paint this picture a little bit. You receive a text. It says, I do not think that you are responsible for this. How much context comes with that? Do you know what this person's thinking? Do you know what this person's feeling? Is it possible this person is accusing you of something? You don't know. I do not feel that you are responsible for this. As opposed to in person. I'm going to use the same sentence, if I can remember it. I think I just messed it up with the two of them. I don't think that you're responsible for this, as opposed to I don't think that you're responsible for this. So now the very same words come with a different meaning, because you're in person. You know that this is not the person who thinks that you're responsible for this. You also know that probably somebody else is, because that's what they're telling you. So it must be Karen, right? How do we feel about Karen? We change the intonation in a different way, and we turn that whole sentence into a different sentence. Let's say the sentence now says, I do not feel that you are responsible for this. Now you know that this person understands that somebody's responsible for it, feels that it's not you, but it must be somebody else. We'll call him Dave. Have you heard the commercials? I did that on purpose. The point is that context is really important, and it's really tempting to avoid any kind of face-to-face interactions, because the more we use context to hide from this, the more tempting it is, and the less practiced we are at communication skills. And communication skills are critical, because we're dealing with individuals in live scenarios, face-to-face, all day, every day. And if we don't use these kind of skills to manage those interactions, then those interactions have the opportunity to manage us. And that affects our performance, and that affects us personally, and that's the effect on the company, which is a cost effect, and which is a performance effect, and which is an opportunity lost effect. Does that make sense? Cool stuff. I'm trying to pack like many hours of stuff down into 40 minutes. So the key is managing the moments, and purposefully managing the moments, and learning the skills and the tools that you can use to manage the moments, where you manage yourself and you manage the people that you're dealing with and interacting with If everybody on the team is aware of this and practiced at these skills, can you imagine the effect that it has on a team and the productivity and the potential of a team? Is it not a huge effect? I absolutely agree. I'd like to tell you a little story which kind of wraps this thing all up. And it's a nice story, except it has a tragic little moment in it. So I'm putting forth, what do they call it on TV when something bad might happen? There's sorry? A disclaimer? Thanks. Viewer discretion is advised. Thank you very much. I don't know why I always forget that one. Viewer discretion advised. There's a sensitive moment in this. So, wait for it. This is actually a true story which happened to a friend of mine. And this is a man that I admire very much. And I asked permission to tell this story because I think it illustrates a really important point. It kind of consolidates all of this concept that we're talking about into one nice little story. This gentleman had a company. It was doing very well. It wasn't a huge company. There was a good-sized team. There was a lot of client interaction. Everybody in the company got along well. This one particular person was a star performer, interacted well, performed great, interacted with clients well, was just an ideal employee. One week, very suddenly, in her first year, everything went bad. There was all kinds of tension. She wasn't performing well. She wasn't interacting well with her coworkers. And she wasn't interacting well with the clients. And that's a real problem. So of course he recognizes this as a problem. We have to do something about this. So he has a choice now. Does he take the boss position and say, we have a problem, we need to fix it? That's one way of approaching it. Have you ever been in a position where that might have been observed, someone taking that approach? Or he chose to say, can I have a moment outside of the group? I've noticed that you seem really upset about something. I'm not sure what it is. I'd like to know if I can help. Is there something bothering you? What's going on? Are you okay? That's what he said. And what he heard was, and this is the disclaimer part, this always affects me. What he heard was, today's my brother's birthday. A couple of years ago, my brother was in a horrible accident on his birthday, and he didn't make it. It affects me like this every year. I have trouble dealing with it. It shouldn't affect me, and it does affect my work, and I'm sorry, and I'll try. I know it shouldn't affect my work. I'll try harder to not let it affect my work. Touching, and it's terrible. Here's what my friend did. He said, I had no idea. I'm so sorry for your loss. This is not the time and place to deal with it. I'd like you to please take the rest of the day off, and take this day off every year, because this is no place to deal with that. Not for you, not for anyone. Now that's one of those little domino effects. In this case, this gentleman does this kind of thing all the time, so he's built up a whole culture. But this is a demonstration of how one little moment causes a domino effect. You know those little domino grids? You push one domino and they go all over the place and then they come back together again? And eventually all the dominoes fall. These are one of these moments. This demonstrates one of these moments where this domino gets pushed and it develops over time into a culture. And that's what you said. It's like I'm cared for. It's like I'm a member of a family. And that caused her to, take the day off, come back and redouble her efforts. And everybody else on the team learned about this event as well. So this one little domino spread out and it affected everybody on the team. And the whole group took off. They bonded, they got along better, they worked well together. Great success. It was a great company. He sold it for a lot of money. He was very happy in the end. This is an example of the power of developing a culture that cares about communication, understands the fact that there's people working on the business problems, and the more you empower those people by giving them tools to be able to work better on those problems, the better the results are going to be for the individuals and for the company as a whole. This is what I strive to bring to my clients. And I've done it, I hope, fairly well in about 30, 40 minutes. But this is actually a workshop that goes on for a number of hours. So not to self-aggrandize, but this is why I do this. This is how important this is. And I hope that's resonated with you a little bit. If you'd like to learn more, I'd like to leave you with a link. With this link, you can download this slide deck with all of the speaker notes so that you can review it again and have it on hand. You can also download a bunch of links to how to give presentations, how to build slide decks, because sometimes when we have to build presentations and do slide decks, we're not entirely comfortable with the process. This is just a great little tool set. I've used them myself, and I'd like to pass them on to you because they might be of value to you. And in general, I hope this whole talk has been of value to you. I'd love it if it was, thank you very much. I guess we're done. Thank you.